So, hello! Welcome to History This Week.
This Week in History.
Hello! Welcome to This Week in History. I'm Mike.
I'm Will.
There we go. And we discuss a thing that happened in history on this day or thereabouts this week. Today we are talking about the death of Baron Fredrick Wilhelm
VonStueben.
He died this day. He died
November 28th.
November 28th.
In 1794.
1794, so roughly this week. And so Will has 1 hour to explain to me what this is all about. I've never heard about this guy. Let's find out. Let's turn the old clock and get the time ticking.
The clock is ticking. All right, so I have to go really fast. Fortunately, since I'm focusing on one guy and I get a whole hour to talk about him, I can take my time and actually give some cool details about
Piece
him.
of cake.
Yes. So, Fredrick Wilhelm VonStueben was actually born Fredrick Wilhelm Ludolf Gerhard Augustin VonStueben.
Catchy.
Yeah, so they shortened it to Fredrick Wilhelm VonStueben. It's
And
not a lot shorter.
Just his friends.
Fredrick. Yep.
Freddie.
His friends were still like... They had 4 of the names, but they didn't have to say all 6 of the names. They called him Stuebe.
Oh, hey, Stuebe.
Hey, Stuebe, how you doing?
Where are we? This sounds like we're in Germany or Austria.
We're starting in Prussia, which is Germany around... So it's interesting because what is called Prussia is technically not like the early state of Prussia. The early state of Prussia is a different chunk of Germany, but what becomes the Kingdom of Prussia is the area kind of immediately around Berlin. So it's very much the core of Germany. And Prussia was originally formed into a country in 1701. So it's fairly new at this time. And it lasted until 1918 at the end of World War I when it was dissolved.
All right. Where was Germany then at the time?
So Germany was like a bunch of little states.
Oh, okay.
There was no just Germany. There was Prussia. There was Brandenburg, which technically is what this used to be. Prussia used to be the province of Brandenburg.
Okay.
There's Silesia, there's the Palatine, there's all these different states. And we talk a little bit about this when we talked about the 30 Years' War in Germany, and it was between all these different chunks of Germany, basically, because Germany wasn't a country, it was the Holy Roman Empire for a very, very long time.
Okay.
And
so Germany itself wasn't Germany until...
It wasn't really called Germany until, I believe, 1864, when it became the German Empire.
Okay.
And it became like an official thing. So until then, though, it was the Kingdom of Prussia. It was this chunk. It was that. It was Austria. It was. I mean, and now eventually are Austria and Germany united for a very, very long time, and then they separated as a consequence of World War I.
Yeah. And
then Hitler went, "I want it back." And then after World War II, for obvious reasons, the country got divvied up again because they're like, okay, apparently as long as Germany and Austria are one country, they cause problems.
Yeah. All right.
I don't know why, but historically that just seems to be the way of things.
This is my embarrassing thing to admit. I had always thought Prussia was part of Russia.
It is close-ish.
But I also thought it just was just
a piece of it.
But like a previous name of Russia even.
Right.
Because it was called Prussia. Yeah, right? Right, well, it's not.
No,
Prussia?
It's not. Prussia is not Russian at all. It's German. And it's actually kind of what you consider how you identify Germany. It's like this very efficient, very militant state. That was Prussia. Prussia was this little, tiny, kind of nothing country. Mm-hmm. And due to a series of really important leaders, specifically there was William, then his son, who we'll talk a little bit about, was Fredrick the Great. He did a series of massive reformations within his military, and then he was a huge buyer into the idea of the Reformation, the original Reformation, and more importantly, the Enlightenment. So he believed in, because when he was younger, he loved art, he loved science, he loved all these other things. His father thought he was going to become a weakling. Okay. Well, his father is less famous than him, and his son went up to become the Great. Because he was a brilliant military strategist. He only had like one defeat.
Which the Great is this?
Fredrick the Great.
Fredrick the Great.
There's actually quite a few very famous Fredricks.
Fredrick the Okay.
Fredrick the Okay. Fredrick the Meh.
Fredrick the He'll Do.
He's fine.
Best Fredrick we got.
Fredrick the Fine. Fredrick the Ooh.
That was so that's not. Is that who we're talking about?
No, today? We're not. But he had VonStueben in his employ, and this is how. And we need to understand who this Fredrick the Great was and what Prussia is to kind of get what VonStueben's about.
Okay.
So Fredrick the Great inherits his kingdom from his dad, And at first he thought he's not maybe going to be this as great of a leader as his father. His father's a straight up authoritarian.
Ooh.
He is kind of a dick. He likes to just fight and kill people, and he thinks if anything goes beyond that, like you're not doing right. Well, his son thought there was more to life than just smashing things over the head. So not only did he begin focus on the military and advancing the military, he also thought about science. Science is very important.
Yes.
It obviously pragmatically has great applications in the military, having scientists, having educated people, because if you have uneducated people trying to lead the military, they're just like, go forward, smack with stick. Meh. So he would have colleges, and he would have soldiers studying, and he really valued that.
That's a good way to trick people into education.
Yes.
You can use it for your military, too.
Exactly, yes. But yeah, so he funded science. He funded all sorts of things to do with the Enlightenment. So science is a big deal, whether it was trying to understand the solar system.
Sure. Now, just you said you keep saying the Enlightenment. That is the 1800s.
17 into the 1800s. Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of this chunk, and there was a bit of it even in the 1600s. Was like the proto Enlightenment, and it's kind of tied to the Reformation, because the Reformation made people question the church, and the church had this heavy-fisted approach to what we say goes and you don't get to question.
Yeah.
So the Renaissance started exploring that, and then the Reformation kind of kicked it into gear where you can just outright go, I don't have to listen to the church and I can come up with my own thing. And then the Enlightenment was this secular pursuit of knowledge where you don't have to rely on the church. And by understanding sciences like medicine, geography, geology, astronomy, not astrology. We don't need to learn about which sign you are. We want to know where the stars are.
You still can for fun.
You can for fun, but I mean that was considered a science before the Enlightenment. Like astrology was like, oh, by the position of Mars, that will determine whether we win the war. And that wasn't
that and these sheep entrails.
Yes. Let me just move them around. I don't like that. Nobody look. Slightly move that entrail. So he was this big promoter of this, and then he was able to fold some of that into his military aristocracy, because these are tough German soldier guys who we saw this during the 30 Years' War is when that started to become a thing, where it wasn't like a knight, it was a knowledgeable soldier who spent his time training to fight, but didn't just like ride around pillaging. That was not that they took out that part, and it wasn't necessarily tied to religion. It was a national duty, like it was your responsibility. So there's this big chunk of not quite nationalism. It's not that extreme, but there's a patriotism involved in Prussia growing and turning into this idea of Germany.
Okay.
So while we have this great king who's very famous, he had 16 major campaigns that he led from the front. This is the time where there's no armor. The muskets are very well developed now. This is pre-Revolutionary War.
Okay.
Just prior to the start of the Revolutionary War is what we're talking.
This is Fredrick the Great.
And this is Fredrick the Great.
Leading from the front.
Leading from the front. So he wants to get the best of the best around him. And he eventually finds this guy named VonStueben, who's not a baron yet. And VonStueben was from a family that had military service, had a little bit of money, not a ton. And he wanted to enlist. So at the age of 17, he enlists in the Prussian military. And he starts out as a second lieutenant and works his way up through the ranks until he's not quite a general, but he's a mover and shaker. And he fights in several battles where he's wounded multiple times, which means he was actually engaged in the fighting.
That doesn't mean he wasn't good.
That doesn't mean he wasn't good. If he died,
sure,
maybe. But no, he was. So it means he was fighting. So like at the Siege of Prague during the 7 Years' War, he was fighting. He was like on the front. He was doing his thing. And as an officer, a lower officer, you kind of have to.
Yeah.
And that was a big part of it too. Was bravery, but intelligent bravery, not like suicide charge, but like, you're guiding your troops.
Sure.
And as a military guy, like, if you have an officer like that, you'll follow them anywhere. You'll do whatever they say, because they're risking their neck like you are.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of respect for this guy building up already. And he starts to move up higher and higher up the ranks, and eventually he becomes so well respected amongst the enlisted and other officers that he's promoted to a captain after a campaign against Russia, because a big part of Friedrich Wilhelm's thing was he expanded the country. First, he took a chunk of what is now Germany or Austria. It's called Silesia, because he was like, oh, it's wealthy and I want it.
All right.
So he had campaigns to take that. And then he wanted part of Poland. So I'm taking that. Whoop! Yeah. Germans always like to take Poland.
Well, yeah.
Poland's really big, and
in general,
not population density. So he's just like,
in general, Germany is landlocked, right?
It has a chunk along the northern seas.
But either way, they're very central.
Yes, like the middle of everything.
Yeah, so it's easy to just
they just kind
on all sides.
They're surrounded. Anywhere they go, they're invading something.
Yes,
like even just hopping across the seas north of them, they're like in Sweden. And just next to them is Denmark, and just next to them
so it's all
is France, and everybody. It's super easy for Germany to invade.
Too easy to invade.
How can they put them there and not expect them to invade?
Yeah, just like Oklahoma.
Right. Oh. Everybody around Oklahoma, look out. They're coming for you. I'm glad we live far enough away from Oklahoma they can't get us.
Yeah.
Well, they could, because they just have to walk across Kansas, because there's nothing there.
And that's why we're safe.
Who's
going to walk across Kansas?
Remember when I told you the first defense of a castle is the lawn?
Yeah, there you go.
Kansas is our lawn.
To save us from Oklahoma. But I will be, or that fan fiction now.
Right there.
Oklahoma becomes...
Oklahoma, when we march to conquer the surrounding states.
The Fifth Reich? What Reich are we on now?
I think Fifth.
Yeah,
Fifth
Oklahoma.
Reich. Why are they they're Germans?
Yep, Oklahoma, the Fifth Reich.
The Fifth Reich.
It's my fan fiction. I'll write it as I like.
Okay. So, coming up during this military stuff, during the campaign in Russia, fighting against Russia, and VonSteuben and his commander are captured, but eventually they get out. And because of how he conducted himself during the whole campaign and in captivity, he gets promoted to captain. Huh. Well, Fredrick the Great hears about this pretty awesome dude who's a great organizer.
Up-and-comer.
And he adopts him in as his aide-de-camp, his assistant who follows him around everywhere and does everything he needs to get done. Nice. That's his mover and shaker guy.
Yeah.
So
his Alexander Hamilton.
Pretty much. And then he gets put in this group of 13 young officers to be personally trained by Fredrick the Great.
Ooh.
So these guys are like, It's like studying under Alexander or Caesar.
Yeah.
And
he ain't called the Great for nothing.
How do I do that? Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. So he's developed different types of, not just an approach to going to war, but strategies throughout the battle. So traditionally in battles, you line up your armies, and maybe you try to send out guys to flank, to go around the sides. By this time we have artillery, so that's shelling people. But it's very much blocks of infantry walking towards each other, stop and shoot. Which I've always thought is not maybe the best way to fight. But muskets weren't super accurate, so you wanted volume of fire.
Okay.
And the amount of discipline you have to stand 100 feet away from somebody and just shoot and load and hope you don't die. I would be "Pah! Skipper, can we just lie on the ground and like this?" And they're not wearing armor. They're not even wearing helmets. They're hats.
Didn't they have the tall...
Yes!
Hats?
They started to have tall hats and the Germans had some of these big hats. Not all of them, but they had... The tricorn was a really big thing now.
What was the point of that hat?
You catch all the water and then you just tip your head one way.
Oh, is that really what?
I have no idea, but I think that's part of it.
It just seems like more of a target to me.
It really does. And the German hats get huge.
Yeah.
Some of those, they're not as big as the French hats. The French hats are colossal. They're this big with feathers. And it's the bigger your hat, the more important you are. And it's shoot that guy.
Yeah.
Duh! Shoot that guy.
The big hat.
Find the biggest hat and shoot the guy. And then you win the war. Whereas then you see Washington and he's just little tricorn hat. He never gets a giant hat. And nope. I'm already 6'1", 6'2", and on a big white horse. And I'm a big enough target. Don't shoot me. So, VonStueben is learning at the feet of this the great.
Yeah.
And one of the strategies he developed was, when you have your army stacked up against the other, and you have it in two lines, you typically want to even out the line so that you have as many guys as they have. He decided, I'm going to shift this strategy so that I have a ton of guys on one flank. so that no matter what's going on, no matter how many guys I locally have more men in one part of the battlefield.
Okay.
So even if I'm horribly outnumbered, I always have more guys here. So I can crush them and then work my way down the line.
Okay.
And it worked brilliantly, especially with this style of fighting. So he developed this strategy, and what winds up happening is you push here, and it crushes this side of the army, and then you just kind of roll down it. And it was very, very effective against vastly superior numbers. So VonStueben goes, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. I like that idea.
Yeah, good idea.
And then also works on how to outmaneuver armies of varying sizes, cutting lines of communication and supply for them while maintaining yours. So there's all of this huge, grand strategy going on. And again, no phones. Your communication is flags and shouting really loudly and riding really fast. And largely, you have to do it.
And sitting in a tent with a big map with big figurines on
yes,
it.
That's yes. You push them around with the stick. And by now, we've got bigger maps.
Ooh.
And bigger things and blocks with colors and little flags and very, very fancy uniforms with tons of medals.
Yep.
The Germans had these huge, they'd have a star this big. I think they were trying to have armor with.
I was going to say, does that work as a
probably not? But
musket repellent?
Look at all of my stuff. I have stars and badges and feathers, and I am very fancy. And this is how we do it in the new Prussian army. We be very fancy.
Fancy.
We are fancy. Yeah. Yeah.
Fancy but protected.
We are not efficient yet about our clothing, but we are efficient in killing, and we look good doing it. All right, so we've got VonStueben studying all this stuff. Well, after a series of campaigns, the army's too big. And Fredrick wants to kind of calm things down.
Oh, okay.
His army's too big.
Too big.
He wants to focus on less expansion and now more on defense. So he has to demobilize his troops.
Ah.
Some of them are not super pleased about this, but unlike the 30 Years' War, where if you demobilize troops, they just become bandits and murder everybody and take stuff. And largely, they weren't paid, so they just stay as an armed force and say, you pay us or we burn stuff. This is a paid army. They are professionals. They don't go do that. But now they're unemployed, so they have to find employment elsewhere. And one of the guys who sadly lost his job was VonStueben. So he starts going all over the place, basically trying to find work. He's very accomplished, not just as a combatant, but he is a brilliant quartermaster. He has this mind for organization, and that's why Fredrick loved him.
What's a quartermaster?
Quartermaster is the guy who's in charge of your supplies.
Oh.
He knows how many muskets you have, how much powder you have, how much food, how much water, what your horses are needing for feed, and he can keep track of all of this stuff for thousands and thousands of troops. And the way he does it is he minimalizes it to the squad level, to a smaller proportion, so he can go, okay, this is how much these many guys are going to need. This, multiply it 10,000 times. Doesn't matter how big the army gets, he can figure out exactly what they'll need. And he develops systems for this, also using Fredrick the Great's concepts to make it work even better. So he's this brilliant organizer, great at practicing things, but he, because he's successful, has some enemies.
Oh, what's the case?
It's not that he is a jerk. He's actually very well liked by highs and lows. But you always got that one middle management guy, who's like, but I want to be popular.
Yeah.
I don't have any skills.
People like him.
Yeah, I don't have any skills. I'm not charming. I'm not I'm fine. Why don't they like me as much as him? Because he's awesome, and you're just kind of there.
I doubt they say I'm fine.
Yeah,
I know I'm fine.
Well, they're like, I'm amazing, but comparatively, So these are those guys who are, I'm a nice guy. Why don't I get more love? It's because that's the baseline of what you should be.
Right.
Is nice. It's like, I'm a competent officer. Well, yeah.
Yep.
I should hope. Right. I should hope. That's the minimal. Anything less than that, you're out. I would hope. That's at least in the Prussian military. So he runs afoul, and there's not a specific guy that they say about this because, but a bunch of rumors start to kick out.
Let's call him Hans.
Call him Hans. So Hans. Sure. So Hans, say he's a colonel.
Sure.
Say he's a colonel. He's beating down on this lower ranking guy, and he's got some land. So Hans is watching. All right. Well, meanwhile, VonStueben has decided he's going to go work in different places. He's got a couple of leads in France. So he starts working in France for a little bit. He helps one of the the name is hard for me. It's like Hohenzollern.
Ooh.
Hohenzollern.
Hogan.
He starts working with different baronies, and he works for a duchess, and she's actually the one who gives him entryship into an order of knighthood. Oh. So that's when he starts calling himself Baron. He's earned the required accolades to go by Baron. It wasn't just like his daddy was. He earned it. He earned the right.
Worked his way up.
He worked his way up.
From the bottom to the middle.
Yes, or maybe from the middle to the middle top.
Okay.
Upper middle.
Right.
Upper middle. And it's all through his own merit. He didn't have a buddy who said, hey, let me give this guy a job. He started from nothing, worked his way up to here. And so he's going around, he's getting some experience. And so he stopped serving the Prussian military in 1762. Stopped. That's when his commission was done. And that's when he got kind of booted from their military.
Yeah.
It kind of sucked for him. So for about 15 years, he's bouncing around from different positions, but still building a name and doing kind of the same thing. And he keeps getting brought into groups that are like, so our organization really sucks.
Oh.
Can you help?
He's a consultant.
And that's really what he is. He becomes an inspector general for a lot of different groups, where he just kind of goes and goes, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. Here's what you need to do to fix it.
Nice.
He's a troubleshooter.
Yeah, okay.
And he's got this fascinating mind for fixing broken organizations. He can dismantle it in his head and put it back together and say, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to do. And that's how you get it done. Yeah. And for that, he's paid decently. Not extremely well, because military service at this time is more of a profession, it's not a status thing. Because they've realized if you're pursuing military status for wealth, you tend to be a bit of a bastard.
Yeah, you gotta have the right motivations.
Yeah,
right?
like when we talked about the Treaty of Westphalia and we talked about the 30 Years' War, there were these guys like Tilly and Wallenstein. And they were wealthy. Wallenstein is a great example of a guy who worked his way up from nothing to something, but he was super wealthy and super ambitious, and he just nonstop plunder and destruction of Germany, to the point where the country is still recovering at this point in time. Like, they can still feel the damage done during the 30 Years' War, almost 200 years before. So they're feeling this, but they're building up. So you've got this professional soldier class, and VonStueben is very much this stoic soldier.
And they're building up something, but they don't have a war per se to do. They're just
Right. So yeah, he's kind of going around and goes, well, I was part of this army that was a little too big, but I helped organize it. You guys have you're trying to have a localized military that can protect itself from either foreign aggression, or if the king calls everybody back up, we jump in and we help him out. Here's how you do it. Also, he's good at finance. Oh. So he helps people with finance. But not like he doesn't open an accounting firm and help out Mike and Will to run their show.
Right.
It's at the baron, at royal levels in some places. Oh. So he's working with this duchess.
So does he give people money?
No.
Or he just
No. He tells them how to make money better and how to cut the fat and do stuff. So he eventually gets called in from this marquis to help him cut costs for his court. It's expensive to maintain a court. Oh, sure. Everybody in the court had not like a judicial court, but for like a royal court. And these are
fancy people.
They're extravagant.
They need lots of candles.
Lots of candles. You're paying for musicians, for fancy foods, for heat.
Court gestures.
Gestures? Yeah, you got to pay for entertainment.
Sure.
At this time we're starting to see the Mozart types coming in.
Oh yeah.
So you're paying for these virtuosos on a harpsichord to come in and play for you, and you have fancy parties and fancy plates and
I've
forks.
seen movies with Mozart. Those plays don't look cheap at all.
So imagine that. It's not remotely cheap. Yeah. And he's coming in going, you're spending more than you're making. This isn't great.
But we're royalty. We get to spend all we want.
He's like, you can't do that. You also want me to reformat your army and do all this other stuff. You can't be doing that. So he eventually goes with this guy to France to basically beg for money. He's trying to secure a loan.
Okay.
So VonStueben goes there. And while he's there, he gets introduced to a guy from across the Atlantic Ocean named Benjamin Franklin.
Never heard of him.
Never heard of him. And this is in 1777. Ben Franklin.
He meets him in France?
He meets him in France because Ben Franklin was kind of sent... Ben Franklin he gets a lot of credit for a lot of things. He actually should have more credit for even more things. Oh. Because he's America's #1 diplomat.
Oh, yeah.
He was sent to France, and actually originally at the start of the Revolutionary War, he was sent to England to sue for peace. Oh. And he was a staunch believer in reconciliation and rejoining the empire. He was a firm believer in that. And at one point, he was called to go to Parliament. And the king, he knew the king, and they got on well. And he knew a lot of the MPs, he knew a lot of the ministers. And there's this one guy who basically had Ben Franklin come in front of Parliament and spent an hour calling him a piece of trash. He was like, you're a colonial peasant, you're a nobody, you're fat, you're stupid,
I bet he
you're
said it in
lazy.
A snide British accent,
Yep,
too.
and he was very condescending, and you are nothing without the British Empire, and you are garbage and a traitor and filth and failure. And Franklin just sat there and took it and kind of went, okay. Well, I know what side I'm on now.
No, one guy.
So this guy, by doing this in front of Parliament, publicly shaming Franklin, converted him from somebody who was willing to bend over backwards, which is no mean feat because he's a big dude, but he was willing to do it, and to try to fix things, to try to make it better, to try to have a reconciliation between the king, Parliament, and the colonies. Because there wasn't originally a problem with the king. The king saw all his subjects as his loving children.
Yes.
But it was kind of an abusive relationship because it's his loving children who owe him money.
Yes.
Parliament was dickish. They were the ones putting on the taxes, and they were pushing different acts and concepts, and they were trying to keep the colonies from having any representation. That wasn't the king's call. That was Parliament just hammering on the colonies. So this alienates the greatest mind in America at the time, possibly ever, Ben Franklin. So he says, fine, I'm taking my ball and I'm going home. And if you want to talk peace, talk to Mr. Washington. And he goes back to the U.S. and becomes the most fervent supporter of a revolution, apart from John Adams at the time.
I suppose he was like on the boat ride back, just stewing over.
Oh yeah, yep. He had it planned out. He had like,
call me fat.
This is for calling me. Okay, year 1, this is what we're doing. All right, year 2, this is the year 3, and also here's the Constitution. Like he's just planning this all out.
Piss off a smart guy.
Especially not that smart.
Sure,
because at the time, there isn't a mind that equals what he's capable of. And at the time, too, he's like 60 when this happens already. He's not a young man.
Yeah.
By the time the revolution actually kicks off, he's in his 70s. And he's still the guy who has to go back and forth across the Atlantic Ocean, and that takes weeks on a big, crappy wooden boat that's maybe moldy, and it's wet, and the Atlantic is wet and cold. It's not fun. And he's got gout, and because he's rich, and that's the rich man's disease. You drink and eat what you want, and your foot hurts, and that's the price you pay. So he's in France at the time,
France, though.
and the French love him. They absolutely love Ben Franklin.
I've heard that he loved France too.
Yup. Oh yes. Because at the time, Ben Franklin is a bit of a man whore.
Yes.
He, growing up, loved women.
Sure.
All through his life, he loved women. But when he's married, he was a very devout husband.
All right.
Even when he would be positioned where he was in Britain for years, and she was back in the States, and he would send for her, and she was like, "I'm not coming across to Britain. Britain sucks. I'm staying here. The weather's better."
Have you tried the ocean?
Also, the ocean's terrible. I miss you and I love you, but I'm not coming over there. So he's like, fine. Well, eventually his wife died, so he indulged, which. Whatever.
I didn't know that. Yeah. And that his wife passed away.
His wife passed away.
Then you know what? Over there. Go on, Benny.
Yeah,
do what you want.
Do what you want. That's fine. I don't see the you need to wear that sadness for the rest of your life and be miserable. Everybody.
Unless he somehow arranged her death.
Yeah, right. Which I mean, I guess if he wanted to,
not all the realm of history possibilities.
He would have done it, I think, a lot sooner.
Sure.
So I believe what it was, she got ill, which was very common. Yeah. She passed. So he's in France. He's doing his thing. He's making friends. he is beloved by the court ladies of the king. So he has a lot of, I think the nice way of saying it now is dalliance is a dalliance. He has a lot, and we have his letters nowadays, which is awesome. And his love letters are randy, man. They are very poetic, but they're really vulgar and very descriptive and borderline pornographic.
I know some later reading. I'll do this one.
Like, I'm going to plant my flag in your field, kind of a thing. Like, it's intense and
saucy,
and it's saucy, and that's French. That's super French for the time. Yeah. Like, everybody basically, even if they're married, they had dalliances. That was expected behavior of the time. It was not taboo in the slightest. And Franklin, being single and being Franklin, he invented the stove. He's a big deal.
Oh, I thought he did that for his dalliances.
No. He invented the stove. That makes him popular. And here he is. He plays up the America thing.
Yeah.
He wears a beaver skin cap, which he never wore in the United States, and acts like he's this pioneer, roughing it type dude. Like he's a pelter and he's doing all this stuff, and he's not.
Yeah.
I mean, Franklin is a self-made millionaire at this point. Like he started with nothing. He was a typist's assistant, which means his job was to carry the big metal blocks with printing on, type for spreadsheets and stuff. The equivalent of a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Whatever they are. Newspapers. And he'd carry this stuff around, and so he got real big, like strong, because he's carrying, 50 pounds at a time all day, every day. And then he started becoming friends with, like, all these newspaper guys. And then he started having, like, assistants. He wouldn't take them as an apprentice because he didn't charge them anything. And then he'd send them
interns
to the different colonies, and they'd start their own papers. So by the time he's this old, the guys he sent out as basically his interns own their own newspapers.
Oh.
So he's in the middle of this giant newspaper network, and he created basically the first media empire, but he wasn't directly in control of it. He didn't want to be, but he helped to create it.
Huh. I've learned more about Ben Franklin in this episode than Baron Fredrick Wilhelm VonStueben.
Because it's very important to know how big this is.
Yeah.
So Franklin is the guy, right? And he's in France and he's making friends. Well, one of the reasons he's in France is he needs mercenaries.
Oh.
We're starting the war and it's not going well. Contrary to popular belief, the revolution was not won by the Minutemen. They were terrible soldiers. Oh. They were absolutely awful. Washington hated the Continental militias. They were useless. They were fine as a speed bump.
Okay.
So he would send, like Lexington and Concord, we lost those.
Oops.
Like, that's the most famous thing. The militia showed up and they shot at the British.
Yeah.
They took, 2 casualties and ran away. They finally were able to hold Bunker Hill in New York because they had better officers and they were trained. And that's how they held. But all of this myth, like the 3% myth, where 3% of Americans fought the British and scared them off, that's utter nonsense.
Oh.
Because it was basically the entirety of the colonies said, go away, Britain. They fought as a group. Not necessarily on the field, but they were creating supplies and helping out the revolutionaries as they're building their forces. They were funding it. They were, the women's sewing circles were making uniforms and flags.
So are you saying that 3% fought, it's higher than that or lower than that?
It's 3%. There's this modern myth that only 3% of the country fought to create America.
Yeah.
And it's more like 60% fought to create America. Because it helps this myth that 3% of Americans could arm themselves and rise up and overthrow our government.
Yeah.
Which is a crazy fabrication.
Yeah. It's probably less likely now, even.
Also completely less likely because, drones.
Yeah.
And missiles. And the majority of Americans have guns and will be like, yeah, I don't like you crazy people. I don't want 3% running anything. I don't like that.
We'll check in 100 years.
Yeah, right. Who knows? Checking in 5. Let's check this in 5.
Okay,
It's getting a little weird sometimes. But anyway, so there's this myth, though, that the militia were this elite fighting force. That they did skirmishing techniques that the British were not used to.
Yeah. I'd heard the Minutemen. Is that where they got the name from?
Because they could arm themselves in a minute. Yep.
Yeah,
well, they also spent about that much time training.
A minute?
It's about a minute. They did not know how to fight in a formation.
No, okay.
At this time, they're fighting the most elite fighting force on the planet, the British Empire.
Yeah.
And there's this myth that the ragtag militia fought them and beat them. Well, they could fight and beat smaller engagements because they'd snipe at them and they wouldn't fight the way that the British were used to. So the British just started hiring guys who were really good at that. Like Robert Rogers.
So if you're not going to fight us fair on the battlefield,
we got guys for that.
We got other methods.
So there's this unit called Rogers Rangers.
Okay.
They are killers, and they fought during they half their guys are natives and trackers, and they fought during the American Indian Wars and all of these different, the French Indian Wars. They are woodsmen and hunters and trackers, and they start using them as a borderline terrorist group that just starts gutting the colonial heartland, and they fight the same way as these militia guys do.
Is that Roberts Rangers?
Roberts Rangers. Or I think it's Roberts Rangers. It might be Rogers Rangers. Let me double check. I think Rogers Rangers.
I'm making a little note to never look back at again.
Yeah. Rogers Rangers.
I like to make little notes for myself in case I want to look up something.
Yep, it was Rogers Rangers.
Rogers.
Yep. And these guys would wear green instead of red. They would blend in with the surroundings. They actually, they did camouflage. That was an English thing. The Americans most of the time didn't do that. They didn't wear green. They usually just wore what they were wearing.
Yeah.
They were kind of like what we would consider like a modern insurgency group, where you blend in with the locals and then you strike from that.
Okay.
So the army's not doing well, and Franklin has been dispatched by Congress to go to France and find trained warriors to convert. They have this huge population in the U.S. who can shoot, but they have no discipline.
Okay.
They have no formal training. They're it's garbage.
Well, they've probably never been involved in a big war like this.
Well, no, they haven't really. Not in a long time. The last one they had was the French Indian War, the 7 Years' War. And the most experienced guy they had is George Washington, who was a screw-up. He killed a emissary.
Ooh. Teach the controversy.
Yes.
George Washington was a screw-up.
He was a screw-up.
You heard it.
He was. He wasn't by now. It actually becomes the best general in America. But
so he's a success story.
He's a success story. He's a great success story because he starts as a total he screws up a lot. And so he inherits this army, and he was famous for saying that to rely on a militia is to lean on a broken staff.
Oh, yeah.
You got no support. They don't have the backbone to take a volley of fire. You see these British guys line up in clumps of 50 men, point their muskets at you, don't even care as you're shooting at them, and they just blaze away, and they all hit their targets or roughly around them, and they just withered and ran because they're like, got nothing for this.
They got real guns.
I'm shooting my one flintlock musket that might hit my target, and they're shooting 50 all at the same time at me. It was a very devastating effect. And then they also had cannon and a lot of training. And these guys are veterans. You don't send your babies to go to the colonies. You send your guys who've been fighting.
Mamas, don't send your babies.
Don't send your babies to the colonies. Right?
Yeah, something like that.
Mm-hmm. I think that's Waylon Jennings with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something like Waylon Jennings.
All right, so Franklin's kind of holding court at the French court. He's super popular. And he gets introduced as VonStueben guy, who they've been singing his praises.
Sure.
They accidentally introduce him as a major general.
Who?
VonStueben.
Okay.
They say he's a major general. He's not.
Nope.
It's apparently a mistranslation of his record.
Oops.
Well, because they had to convert it to French from German, and then from French to English.
Yeah.
So, and VonStueben's like, so what's your offer? And Franklin just says, well, we can't pay you because we don't have any money. But we'd really like you to help us. And he's like, are you serious? No!
Oh.
You guys are nuts!
Now, was this whole translation going between the whole conversation?
He had a guy, and then he had Ben.
Right.
Ben could speak French fluently.
Oh.
And VonStueben could speak French.
Oh, well, there we go.
So they actually probably spoke French to each other.
Makes most sense, yeah.
Yeah. Because VonStueben had an aide-de-camp himself now. Now he's a big enough mover and shaker. He's got his own little squad.
Yeah. Help us for free, he says.
Yep.
No.
And he's like, no! My services are not cheap.
Sure.
I'm going home.
Plus, have you seen that ocean?
Yeah. If I have to go over there, it's going to cost me money. I got to move my household. I got to do all this. And you want me to commit to a war from the start.
For free. Yeah.
No.
Okay.
So he takes his ball and goes home.
What do you think Ben's plan was, or his hope? Was
Well, he was hoping he could get him.
I guess.
But he puts this idea in his head.
Oh, okay.
But Ben is impressed by this guy. So he takes information back to the U.S. He's like, okay, we got to get him.
I'm impressed by this guy.
I don't know how we're going to get him.
This guy who would not work for free.
He wouldn't work for free, but we got to get him. We need a better offer.
Yeah.
We need a much better offer
better than nothing.
Come here for free.
Okay.
Well, VonStueben gets back, and Hans has been busy. His rival
oh,
Hans
no.
that you named.
I did. Not really his name.
We don't know whose name
Might
is.
be Hans.
For years, there has been a rumor building up about VonStueben that he's a homosexual.
A homosexual?
And at this time, that is a no-no.
No. Well...
That's punishable by death in some instances. Yeah. Okay?
Still currently is in some places.
Still currently is in some places.
Would they call him a confirmed bachelor at the time? Do they have... All right. Yeah.
So, VonStueben, never married.
No, that's...
Always surrounded by handsome men, young men.
The proof is looking worse and worse for VonStueben.
Now, he probably was. But he didn't appreciate being called out on it.
Well, not if it's not a thing that is allowed.
Because it's not allowed. It's not allowed. Now, personally, I mean, honestly, if you're gay, you just are. And,
sure.
and then, but so he's trying to be himself, and these guys are crushing him for it. So he gets back to Germany, realizes he's never going to get a promotion, even if they couldn't ever prove that he was gay, because the rumor's there. So he'll never be able to climb the ranks higher than captain.
Oh, no.
He's stuck.
Unless.
So...
I feel like it's an unless.
He goes back to France.
Yeah.
And has another meeting with the Americans. And says, pay me after the war, and I'll join you.
Okay.
You don't have to pay me now.
Yeah.
But I want something after the war. I want consideration. He takes his staff, including his young aide-de-camp, who's always with him, the guy who speaks French.
That sounds now more...
A little more. Yep. I was waiting to reveal this, because it's not pertinent to his life, other than it took away his chance to move up in Germany.
Yeah.
So he sails across the U.S., and he meets George Washington at a place called Valley Forge. Now, Valley Forge is famous.
Cold.
For being cold.
Yeah.
And for being a mess. But also, when the American military went in as a militia, they came out as the Continental Army. And it is 100% because of Baron Fredrick Wilhelm VonStueben, who gets no credit nowadays because he's German and he's gay. But what happens is...
But the only reason he came over was because...
Because he was gay.
He
got kicked out of it. He basically says to Prussia and says, fine, if you have a problem with who I am and you want to go and talk about me behind my back and you want to spread these rumors, you want to deny me advancement after everything I've done for you and all the knowledge in my head, I'm taking it where I'll be appreciated.
One would think he'd be a good cautionary tale for people who are homophobic or anti-gay one way or another.
You'd think.
Go, I could accidentally tip the scales of a revolution.
The only way this could be better is if he was British. And the British were like, no, we don't want you because you're gay. He's like, fine. Then I'm going to help the people you hate most. So he gets kind of screwed over. He can't go anywhere in Europe. So he goes, like so many people, goes to America in search of opportunity.
We welcome everybody.
We did. We should. Because if we didn't invite this gay German, he gets to Valley Forge, and he is immediately, after meeting Washington, who's super impressed with him through translators, because Washington speaks English. Maybe a little bit of French.
Probably American, really, frankly.
Yeah. Well, and Washington's very... He's a classic stoic. He is like... A gentleman behaves a certain way. He insisted all of his officers behaved in a gentlemanly fashion. VonStueben shows up in a red uniform in New York and is almost shot on sight because they think he's British because a miscommunication told him to wear red. And he thought that was what he was supposed to wear.
No, he said, don't wear red.
He did, don't wear red. And he must have smudged the writing.
Oops.
I feel like Hans was in on it.
Yeah.
You would cross out the don't and just have it say, wear red. We shall kill VonStueben at last.
What a nefarious plot.
Right? It was not a very good plot because after a very brief confusion, they're like, oh, you're the German.
Yeah.
But not like the Hessian mercenary German.
Right.
You're our German.
Let me take the red coat off here.
We're this instead.
Okay, good.
So VonStueben shows up at camp in full dress uniform. And there is a description of him that is at the memorial at Valley Forge it's a soldier's perspective on him. And this guy says it was like Mars, the god of war, embodied in one person.
Is that this picture that you sent of him?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll
flash it up
here. We'll push that up there. So VonStueben, the guy describes VonStueben as being huge and towering over everyone from the side. And he says from the size of his horse, he always carried 2 big pistols. He had this air of just authority. He always wore the dress uniform. He never dressed down. He had like a small entourage with him, and everywhere he went, he acted like he was the boss of the world. And he swore like a sailor in like 7 different languages.
Wow.
And the soldiers loved that.
Yeah.
Because he would get down there and he'd be swearing at them in German, and he would, anything the soldiers had to do, he did it with them. So his entrance is this big grandiose thing, and then he just starts swearing at everybody and causes kind of a ruckus, and everyone starts running around going, I don't know what to do. And this, and oh my God, who is this guy?
German's a good language to
swear
in.
Yes, it is. And then he starts bouncing, but he learns enough English to swear at people in English, and he learns enough French to swear at people in French, and he's got some Italian. He picks up all the swear words, and he's just really good at using them. It's like the most extreme version of a drill sergeant you can imagine, in a dress uniform that is a big hat and a fancy outfit, just losing his mind at you. And he's very tall and powerfully built and has this aggressive feature, and he just cows everybody. Like, everyone's just terrified, but also like in love with this dude. They're like, this guy is awesome, but God, he's gonna kill us. And he gets hired on to be the Inspector General of the entire Continental Army. After Washington meets him, they're like, oh, this guy's squared away. This guy knows what's what.
Yeah.
Hi, Mr. Pitters. The cat is yelling at us.
Sorry for the cat interruption.
It's okay.
He loved to hear stories about gay Prussian generals.
Yep. So he goes around Valley Forge, and he realizes there are no toilets. The soldiers are just peeing where they want to pee.
It is a valley.
It is a valley.
I mean, it's
which
all
means everything just goes down into it.
Where you sit in your tent up top there.
The soldiers pitch their camp wherever they want it. There is no organization. The officers are wherever. Washington can't find anything. There is no supply system. There's no order. There are no official kitchens. The kitchens are right next to where people pee.
Ooh.
When they slaughter an animal, they kill the animal and leave the carcass. Their tents are badly put together, and they've like got some huts.
Yeah.
And it's a mess.
We're all set to start a country. We're good.
Yep. And this is the militia. This is what we got this, man. We're just, and they're all just sitting there in misery. And VonStueben says, yeah, this is all going away. This is all crap. We're changing it all. And he just starts walking through the camp with his aides going, do this, do that, do this, that needs to change. And what he winds up doing is he completely changes how the entirety of the camp is laid out. He has Washington and all the officers have their tents reset up elsewhere, has all of the enlisted set up in their regiments so that if they have to get called to muster, you don't have to run across camp finding Jim and Bob and Terrence, because they're all over the place. They're all together now. He puts the kitchens at one end and the latrines at the other, and actually has there be a latrine.
That's a good thinking all around.
He has everything get cleaned up and organized, and he has them do that like on a permanent daily basis. They have to maintain cleanliness. It cuts down on disease immediately, and then he starts looking at the books and goes, wow, you have no organization at all.
We did offer you no money.
He's like, there's graft, there's theft, there's black market stuff going on. Like, they were stealing muskets and selling them for cash, like to do whatever they wanted with it.
Sure. Yeah.
So, like, one of the things that he did was he set up like an armory system, and he wound up saving the Continental Army, like it was between 5,000 and 8,000 muskets that would have just gone missing or been destroyed or just fallen into disrepair. And that was like in his first year. He's like, yep, no, this is bad. You guys are terrible at this. And then, while he's doing all of this,
we know that's why you're here.
he also starts setting up the training regimen. He believes very much in you train the soldier, then you move on to the squad, then the company, then the regiment. You start here. If they're good, they'll be good wherever you put them. But you have to also train at these higher levels. So he gets together with some guys, and he starts training them. Then he sends them out, and they start training everybody else. He sends them out, and they start training everybody else. Teach the teachers. And he picks it by the best sergeants. He says, I want your best sergeants. Your best non-commissioned officers, you send them to me. I'm going to teach them. Teaches them, and they learn his tactics that he learned directly from Fredrick the Great. And it's revolutionary, which is fitting, especially
Sure,
Revolutionary War.
Yeah.
And they're like, wait, this is how you fight? And he's like, yeah.
No.
What have you guys been doing?
Yeah.
I just kind of line up, doing shooting, and they shoot us and we run away. He's like, no, that's not going to work. And you're fighting against Britain. These people are really good at this. So this is how we beat that. He also starts explaining to Washington different ways of maneuvering the army.
Oh.
So you can intercept things and figure stuff out. Because Washington, while a capable commander, his military experience is nowhere near where VonSteuben is. Like, nothing close to it.
Experience-wise,
Yes,
right, yes.
military experience-wise. Because he's been in one war and he fought in maybe 1 or 2 battles. And yet still was considered the most experienced guy they had.
No,
it was largely because he was the richest guy with some experience.
Yeah.
When you own, like, Virginia...
Yeah, I've heard of that guy.
Yeah.
He's the one for me.
Yeah, exactly. Do we have anybody else? Nope.
Nope.
No.
I mean, we could look, but...
There's my cousin Jim.
Does he own a lot of stuff?
He shot at his neighbor once
Oh.
because the guy was, tried to steal his cow.
Cousin Jim might be good, but...
He's going to be a colonel.
Washington had a name.
He's going to be a colonel now.
All right.
So VonStueben recreates, or rebuilds the camp. And then he also starts to format how we trained soldiers. And he writes what's called the Regulations for the Order and Discipline of the Troops of the United States. It is the first official soldier's manual used by the United States military. It was called the Blue Book. It was issued to officers and non-commissioned officers, and that was the mandatory training book that they used until, I think, like 1814.
He wrote that while in America training?
He wrote that.
Like,
And every day what he would do is he would write a lesson plan in German and then have it converted into English so that Washington could then absorb the information and then teach that as well.
So I'm saying, did he set out to write a book, or was he just writing these daily
This
things?
was
And
his, he set out to say you need to have a formal way of
Right.
teaching all of your soldiers.
And as he put it together,
So as he put it
while
together
training them,
while training them,
then-
by the time he was finished at Valley Forge, he'd had this book.
Okay.
And this was a way so they could mass print it and just say, give this to all of your leaders so they can teach this to future regiments so I don't have to keep doing this.
yes,
Because that's a pain in the ass.
it's a good idea. Use
And
books.
his ideas were used all the way up until the American and Spanish War.
Oh.
It's still referenced to this day. So these were lasting ideas about leadership, about camp cleanliness, about physical training, about how you move troops. And it is an itemized idea of how to do it. Even nowadays, when you join the military, you're handed a soldier's manual on how to be a soldier.
Oh, okay.
This is the first time that's been done in America. So he wrote that by himself
While doing it.
for free with a to be paid later if we win. So he's got a lot riding on the war.
Sure.
He's got a lot riding on the war.
You thought book publishing was tough.
Yes. So what's fascinating is Valley Forge is considered the changing point for the war.
Yeah.
We were on our last legs. America was going down. It was a candle that was fluttering in a gale, and then he just shows up, puts a lantern over it, protects it, and then turns into a bonfire.
Yeah.
Because if we hadn't come out of Valley Forge with a new understanding of warfare, with
Right.
these new training ideas, that's not a country. You're not a country. You can't fight the British with a militia and hope to hold up.
So, all right. So because Ben Franklin was made fun of,
Because Ben Franklin was made fun of,
and
he
because
went out recruiting.
Baron
And because VonStueben was gay
and made fun of,
and made fun of,
yeah.
don't make fun of us.
Watch out, bullies.
Yeah, don't make fun of people because they might come back and be your undoing.
They might be really good
They
at
might
things.
be really good at things.
Yeah.
So yeah, VonStueben does this, and then he becomes this ingratiates him forever to Washington. Washington is like,
Thanks, pal.
this is my guy.
Yeah.
He's going, but he doesn't keep him around. He sends him where he's needed.
Okay.
He uses him like a cudgel to fix stuff. He's like, this organization sucks. And he assigns Alexander Hamilton to be his assistant for a lot of these issues. So Alexander Hamilton is Washington's secretary.
Yeah.
And half the time when he needs something done, he sends VonStueben to be the terrifying presence and Hamilton to be the speaker.
Interesting. Funny, VonStueben didn't make it in the musical.
He's not in the musical.
Probably hard to rhyme VonStueben.
VonStueben. VonStueben is Reuben.
Hey, Lin-Manuel, get to work on that.
Do it. Fix it, man.
Try rhyming VonStueben.
VonStueben. He's an important part of your character that you helped make very famous. So VonStueben gets sent out to do all these things. He's this inspector general, then he gets promoted to being a field commander. And at one point in the war, he is one of the division commanders. So it's Washington, I believe Nathaniel Greene, and VonStueben. Yeah. So he's this foreigner. And he gets put in charge of an entire third of the Continental Army. Wow. And they, from this point on, start winning, using his tactics and his strategies that he devised. He knew when the British were moving in specific ways because of their battlefield strategy and tactics. And he was one of the first guys to say to Washington, we need to move here, not here. And it caused a battle. I forget exactly which one, but it was a turning point because that's when they started using this new model army that he had helped construct. So the British eventually are defeated, and the war comes to a conclusion, and they're like, well, suppose we got to pay him now. And they did.
Oh.
And they did.
Checking for their wallet.
They still were. They gave him a house, which needed some work.
Okay. In America?
In America.
Okay.
In 1784, he was made an official citizen by Pennsylvania. They said, we don't care where you're from, you're a citizen. Yeah. The legislature said it. And then New York said, yep, sure, he's a citizen. He's officially an American. This guy is as American as America
He did all the things.
He did all the things. He's a big deal. They gave him a house and an estate, which required some work. Now, during his time in the military, he had a new aide-de-camp, and it was a young, handsome American officer who was maybe gay, but he got married. That doesn't necessarily mean he's not gay. Yeah. But he was married.
Okay.
And he had a kid, and he was very happy to use the attraction VonStueben had to climb the ranks and do well for himself. VonStueben did not begrudge him this. He was not like a jerk. But the guy had a permanent room at VonStueben's house. Forever. And I didn't write the name down, so I'm going to quick look. Because this is important, because this guy was actually... He went on to do other big things with his life.
Right. You got about
I got
3 or 4 minutes.
I got very little time.
To wrap this history up.
Very little time. So let me get the right name down.
VonStueben's new assistant.
So yeah, at Valley Forge he had 2 guys that were in their 20s. There was Benjamin Walker and William North. They were officers. They were in their 20s when he met them at there. And he also had Peter Stephen Duponceau, who was his 17-year-old secretary. They were referred to as extraordinary, intense, emotional relationships. So, possibly romantic. And given his reported behavior of being gay, it is very likely that there was a romantic relationship. It's also thought that there was a relationship between Walker and North, if not with VonStueben. So he could have been kind of the elder gay man who was like, it's okay to be gay, and I'm going to take care of you and protect you. But I don't necessarily need you to be with me.
I wonder how those conversations went in the late 1700s.
I have no idea. But, interestingly enough, he formally made both of them his heir.
Oh.
So, when he died, these guys got all his stuff. It wasn't a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
But it was... Stuff. He got a pension.
So he got never married, he was never married, never had kids?
Never married, never had kids. Always preferred the company of young men.
There we go.
Not young men, but, in their 20s.
Younger.
Usually. Although this 17-year-old guy, but... It's not assumed that he did anything untoward, okay?
Who are we to judge?
So, he's got... But what's interesting, though, is America never questions him for that. Oh. Not once! And it's largely because he has the first president of the United States standing back there going, anybody touches VonStueben, you got a problem with Washington. It's like, because he did enough, but, that's one gay man who was able to do enough that he wasn't questioned. He was allowed to live in peace. So he basically had to reformat the entire United States military. So
that's all it takes to be accepted.
That's all it takes to be accepted. But it's interesting that, and it's probably part of the reason why he's not so well known, is because he was gay. Yeah. And that is largely not treated well at all.
It's taboo for Britain.
And throughout our history, and it's still talked down upon. Huh. And he wrote the very first soldier manual. Without him, Valley Forge would have just been a place where soldiers went to die. and without his tactical brilliance and strategic knowledge, and really, super importantly, his ability to organize, the military would have just collapsed under itself. Washington was very desperate, and immediately after Valley Forge, he had a complete turnaround of his ideas and his mindset, and we went from losing everything to winning. And it was this huge turnaround. It's all because of this gay German nobleman who just showed up out of the blue and worked for free because people treated him like crap. And nobody knows about him. There is, however, in America, a VonSteuben Day.
Oh, is there?
Yes. It's, I believe, September 17th is his birthday. I believe that's when it is.
Okay.
It's widely celebrated by Germans. For some reason, not in Wisconsin, where we have a ton of Germans. Yeah. But in the East Coast, I think in Pennsylvania, it's more of a big deal. There is a town, Steuben. That's where he died. It was named that after he died. There is his house and everything is very fondly remembered. He's memorialized, but it's very local. And it's kind of like, we remember Hamilton, who's the secretary, and helped build the Constitution. We remember Washington, who was the overall leader, but without VonStueben, those guys never would have survived, probably. We talk about Lafayette, who was a Frenchman who helped build the country. We talk about Rochambeau, who was a Frenchman who helped build the country, but not VonStueben for some reason. And a big part of that is because, I think, partially because of this kind of hatred of German stuff post-World War II. And World War I, people started to not talk about stuff, especially like his mentor, Fredrick the Great, was idolized by Hitler.
Oh.
So then people have like really walked away from talking about Frederick the Great like he was so great. Like, oh, he's the idol of a psychopath. Yeah. So the guy who studied under him, maybe we shouldn't talk about him because he's associated with a horrible human being. So there's a lot of like that anti-German that came out post World War II and post World War I, and kind of in general. Even at the time, there was a very strong anti-German sentiment in the Revolution because the Hessian mercenaries were ruthless, and they were German. And the British basically said, you go do horrible things, and we will pay you a lot of money to do it. And they were very good soldiers, and they were monstrously difficult to deal with. And they just kind of pillaged, too. Yeah. Like, they had no problem. Whatever you paid them to do, they did it. They were ruthless. So it's hard to separate this guy just because he's German from being with them.
Germany makes it very difficult to love Germany.
They really do sometimes.
Stop it, Germany.
It's better now. Now they're ruthless in business. So another thing VonStueben did was he oversaw the first meeting of I think it's the Brotherhood of Cincinnati. Cincinnatus was considered the greatest Roman. He was a farmer who was given the title of dictator to help fight a threat to Rome, and then when he was done after 6 days of holding absolute power, he gave it up. Oh. Washington is considered our Cincinnatus. Yeah. He is the great. He was a farmer, although he was I own 12 million slaves and have all the land, farmer. And then after the war, he hung up his spurs. They offered him the crown. Yeah. They said, you'll be a king. And he's like, no. Nope, we fought to not have that. Yeah. So he gave it up. VonStueben oversaw the very first meeting of that. Oh. And it was a brotherhood, a fraternal order of people who were officers in the Continental Army who'd served for 3 years or more. If you were a Minuteman, you were not admitted. They weren't considered full soldiers.
Just helpers.
But if you went from being a Minuteman to being an active soldier in the military, then you're welcome. Huh. And there were, I think, up to 9,000 eligible members because it was for officers. And within the first year, 5,000 eligible members were members. They were like, well, we want in on this. And it was guys like Hamilton were there. And it's like the meeting of the minds, all these very famous guys. Washington was considered the epitome of what you wanted to be. And he oversaw that. And he lived this from the rest of his life. He went back to being an inspector general, kind of, helping out, making sure the military still functioned properly. Then he resigned in 1784 when he was finished, passed away peacefully in his home 10 years later.
Oh, look at that.
It was kind of a American dream. But he didn't die rich, but he wasn't like impoverished. Yeah. He had some money problems though because he had nothing when he came here.
Right.
And when the country was first forming, he was broke. So he would every so often have to he felt shamed, have to go to Congress and say, I'm destitute. I shouldn't be destitute.
Remember how I helped you?
Could we maybe not have me be destitute? So finally, at one point, Congress said, okay, we're putting this guy on a permanent pension.
Oh, that's
So
nice.
he got like $3,000 a year, I think, as a pension, which was a pretty decent pay then.
Probably.
For the rest of his life, no matter what he does.
Oh.
Take care of VonStueben. And they did.
So he ended up okay.
Yes, he lived okay. But that's fascinating to me that there's this guy who came from Prussia who could have been who knows what. He could have been like a legendary general in Prussia. And instead he comes to America for free.
To become a non-legend here.
To become a non-legend here. But without whom, we would not... I 100%... We wouldn't be a country without his efforts.
Well, there you go.
So
Appreciate Fredrick.
Just remember,
VonStueben.
all you people who don't like gay people, we wouldn't be a country if it wasn't for a very fancy-pantsed, hoity-toity, terrifying in combat, masterful organizing gay German.
Now I know the posters to have the next gay pride rally.
Yep, VonStueben.
Just a sign that just says VonStueben.
VonStueben. We might get concerned. They might think that you're from
We may have to have some explanation.
Is that a fascist? Why has he got this old white dude with a wig?
All right.
That's the most.
I learned plenty today.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot today. We're going to go do this again next week, and we're going to learn. Next week, we're moving back to Rome.
Back to Rome.
Oh, we love Rome.
Yep.
And we are discussing...
Belisarius. He's a general, a Roman general. We're going to find out why he's important. He's actually originally sent for... This is from Eastern Roman times.
Okay.
And so we're going to talk about something that happened 536 AD. Belisarius takes Rome.
Oh, well, 537.
Why did he take it? Who did he take it from?
I don't know.
Who the heck is this guy? Why has he got a weird name?
If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. We need some more subscribers.
Yep.
And we will be giving you another one of these every week.
Yep.
Until we
See you next
can't
week.
anymore.
Yeah, till we run out of history.
We'll be fine.
We'll get all caught up.
All right. Thanks all.
Bye guys.